Welcome to this pre-conference IPDA Conversations Live. I'm Professor Hazel Bryan, Chair of IPDA, and it's my pleasure to open proceedings today. Our annual conference, titled Imagining the Post-Professional, Identity, Ethics and Responsibility Beyond Professional Standards, will be taking place on the 27th and 28th of November. But to ensure that our wonderful, vibrant IPDA community has an opportunity to come together in advance of the conference, our international associations have planned this pre-conference series of conversations to give us an opportunity to begin to think about the conference themes today. That way, we'll be able to continue the conversations up to and beyond the conference. We currently have 6 IPDA associations: IPDA England, whose chair is Pauline Smith; IPDA India, whose chair is Dr. Balwant Singh; IPDA Ireland, whose chair is Dr. Fiona King; IPDA Hong Kong, whose chair is Paul Campbell; IPDA Scotland, whose chair is Katrina Oates; and IPDA Cymru, whose chair is Emma Jane Milton. Our association leads and members of our respective associations have each taken one of the conference themes in readiness for today. And so this is how it's going to work. They will present their responses to the conference themes, and after 2 association presentations, we'll move to breakout rooms for a discussion of about 10 minutes. IPDA England will start, followed by IPDA India, then we'll break out for 10 minutes. IPDA Ireland and IPDA Hong Kong will follow, and then breakout rooms. IPDA Scotland and IPDA Cymru will follow, and then breakout rooms. And finally, we'll all come back together for the plenary. And in the breakout rooms, this is an opportunity for us to pick up and discuss the key themes, and for you to have an opportunity to explore the themes as applied to your own contexts. And so without further ado, I'm going to now hand over to IPDA England.
Hello everyone. I'd just like to introduce a member of the IPDA committee, Dr. Suzanne Culshaw. We held a recent seminar on teacher well-being and its implications for professional development, which fits obviously with the IPDA conference theme very much. So you're about to hear a very passionate keynote from Suzanne, which I know you will enjoy. Please, a big welcome from IPDA England, and do join us if you possibly can. Over to you, Suzanne.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you about struggling, which isn't the cheeriest of subjects. So I'm glad I'm first, because it might get cheerier as the morning goes on. But why do I want to talk about struggling? Well, I want to talk about struggling because if you are struggling, I argue that you can't consider professional change or professional learning, and resilience actually can feel really uncomfortable if people talk about resilience and you know, we need to be more resilient. So so I'm going to position struggling firmly in the field of well-being, not in the field of capability, competence and failing. And so I'm going to talk for the next couple of minutes, and I am timing myself because I could talk for a long time. And we're going to be learning from the experience of struggling as a teacher. And so on the slide that you can see are the 5 dimensions, if you like. I'm going to talk about the 5th one most, but just quickly, in my PhD research, I learned that struggling is a very complex phenomenon, actually. It is involved with heightened embodied tensions, so things like knots in your stomach, your headaches, feet not touching the ground kind of sensations. there's a negative emotional tone, so there's a lot of sadness, anger, frustration with the experience of struggling. Interestingly, there is a reduced sense of controllability, and I think this is particularly pertinent to kind of support and professional learning. So a lot of my participants said they didn't feel they had much say or no say at all in who their mentor was, for example, which is an interesting dimension. Impaired performance. So a lot of the literature out there says that poor teaching can lead to struggling. My research has flipped that on its head and actually says that struggling can lead to impaired performance. So there's all kinds of reasons for leaders, for example, to listen to the fact that struggling can lead to impaired performance. So if you want your teachers to teach well, you need to get to the root of why they're struggling. But I'm going to talk mainly, and the rest of my conversation is about the fact that struggling is a temporary fractured state. So I'm saying that struggling feels like a fracture. And I want you to just kind of focus on that word fracture for a minute. Because what do we do when we fracture a bone? Well, we let it rest, we let it heal. We certainly don't pile the pressure on it. We don't keep walking on a fractured leg, for example. And so this idea of fracture, I think, is really important in terms of professional change and resilience. I would argue that when you're struggling, you need to stop and rest and heal and be allowed to do that. So, so the idea is that to be able to deal successfully with a fracture, you let it rest, but then resilience kind of comes in. Resilience comes in kind of once you've healed. So I'm saying, well, don't put pressure on the struggling. Don't put pressure on people until they're coping again. And so I'm not terribly comfortable with the idea of resilience. I have referenced Day's work where resilience is called the ability to call upon reserves of physical, psychological and emotional energy. But I'd like to introduce very quickly, and I appreciate my time is running out, the notion of buoyancy. And it's maybe something we can talk about in the breakout rooms, the idea of buoyancy. Because a lot of the participants who said they were struggling felt that they were drowning. And so they didn't feel buoyant. And there's some really interesting work being done by Martin and Marsh and Parker and Martin that talk about buoyancy. And I'll just finish with this as the ability to successfully deal with setbacks, challenges and struggles. And so my argument is, we can't talk about professional learning and professional change. We can't talk about resilience if we are struggling. Okay, I think that I better stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Suzanne, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating and has given us an awful lot to think about. We're now going to hand over to IPDA India and Dr. Balwant Singh. Balwant. Balwant, you're on mute.
Hello.
Thank
Hello.
you, Balwant. Thank you. We can hear you.
Are you getting me now?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay. Now, it's beautifully summarized by IPDA England regarding the resilience example with a fractured bone and then taking rest out of struggle and tension. I think it's very relevant. I would like to correlate my slide right from the previous discussion. In the last point in my slide, that is creative professional learning and to identify and address the learning gaps. Now here we are at a stage because of this pandemic that there is a lot of learning gap, a lot of break in the processes, especially in the low income countries and middle income countries. It's a very difficult problem. And when we have to restart, it will need a lot of creativity. Creativity is a part of our professional learning and development. In fact, now this is the time. Of course, it is in the past as well in the teaching learning process. Creativity and professional development are interrelated. These are interrelated. And a teacher or any professional has to be creative. to develop his professional learning as well as his professional development. And we have identified these sub-points regarding if a teacher or a creative teacher or a creative professional should have a mission-driven problem recognition. So we have a mission for this in a particular situation, in a particular organization. What is the problem there and how we can solve that problem? We should be able, by our own creativity, recognizing the problem. And then identification of a starting point for the action. So this is another area, because the teachers usually, they think that perhaps the solution is from some external sources. No, he has to be according to the local needs, according to the local problem. So from where he or she can start an action for the solution of the problem or for his creative learning or the teaching process. Similarly, we have ensuring availability of scientific knowledge. So this is another area. According to the changing situation, we have to ensure from where we can get the logical and scientific content, whether it is available or it has to be recreated or it has to be researched. This is the point on the part of the creative professional. Similarly, we have got establishment of opportunities with mentors, administrants, and students. So a creative professional should be open enough and have a social capital with the mentors, so that he can practice, he can discuss, and can invent something from their rich experience and can go to the point for which he is struggling for. So similarly, coordinated development of intervention leading to transfer of knowledge, research, and implementation. So this is a coordination effect. And then the next one is cultural appropriateness of creative professional development for learning, for learner-centered education relevant to the local needs. Sometimes we imitate certain models which are not applicable, which are not possible to the local needs or to the learner-centered education. So the creativity means we have to focus according to the people sitting in front of us or the organization where we are working. And the next one is availability of safe and congenial space where teacher can learn and grow in collaboration, or the patronage of supportive organization structure. This is a very big area where we need the support of the leaders, where we administrators, policymakers, implementers. So this is the area which will definitely, when I'm getting the support from my organization or from my leaders, then definitely my internal locus of control will promote me, will motivate me to create more new inventions for my professional learning. Similarly, response to the changing needs and challenges which is coming up these days. And the last point I have discussed already. So these are the sub-points. Basically, a teacher has to be a creator, or a professional should be a creative person, so that he can do all these things in a better way according to the present circumstances. All these areas can be deliberated thoroughly. Each subject, each sub-theme, each sub-point in itself is a complete area. So the papers or the research or the articles or the posters can be very interesting if all these are taken into depth. I think with the internal locus of control of the teacher or the writer or the researcher, these topics, to my mind, are perhaps suitable to be discussed in an international conference which is being held by our organization in November. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Balwant. That's absolutely fascinating, and an opinion from India. We now have an opportunity to listen to IPDA Ireland, who are going to be looking at researching creatively across disciplines and settings. And I'm handing over to Carrie Archer. Over to you, Carrie.
Thanks very much, Hazel. So yeah, I'm from IPDA Ireland, and our title today is about researching creatively across disciplines and across settings. And to do that, we're going to just lead you through some of our thoughts that we went through as a committee when we explored this title. So sometimes when we think about researching creatively, we might think about creative methodologies. So photography or videography, maybe multimedia or arts-based methods, or perhaps on policies focused on creative engagement, such as that we've got represented in the logo there. So that's the logo for a creative engagement project in Ireland, and it's supported by the National Association for Principals and Deputy Principals. It's an arts and education programme that involves artists coming to school to work with students. And the idea is that it encourages creativity, initiative, expression, and then that's supported by the school leaders, teachers, and artists. But despite that running for 10 years, there hasn't been research conducted on it. So something like this is a doorway wide open. It gives us an opportunity to look at maybe different ways to see themes such as the learner voice or the link between schools and the broader world of the arts, impact of creativity, and how leadership can be enacted on a number of different levels within the school setting. So it opens it wide. When we think about the learning process then across all of the different sectors in education, so from early years to prison ed, from post-primary to community education, higher ed, further ed, and all of the different pieces that are in between that, there are lots of different transitions, but there are loads that we can learn, lots of commonalities, but loads of differences too. And that gives lots of opportunity to research creatively and to learn from each other now more so than ever. So we think that researching creatively can also be viewed as it's an emerging field. It seeks to develop new ways of understanding, new ways of situating and reconfiguring knowledge, especially in this digital age. And one thing that's been really, really clear for us is that communication and collaboration across settings and across disciplines has been a necessity in the past few months. And that has definitely been facilitated by online communications and our digital capabilities. So in the interest of public health, we've been forced to work in a way as educators that we never thought possible. We didn't think we ever would, and we didn't think we ever could. So many of us moved from fully face-to-face on a Thursday morning to being fully online by Friday. And if the government or the Department of Education or our principals had told us to do that, there's no way we would have. And the things that have become possible for us and that would have been seemed impossible have now become possible. So this is where this image comes in. It's the idea that we've shattered our own expectations. We've worked, we've researched together, sometimes unknowingly across settings and across disciplines. And those who've been delivering in online spaces have kind of opened those classroom doors to us, their knowledge, their resources, expertise, experience, and brought everybody else in. So organisations in the fields of accessibility have opened up conferences to try to help people across sectors and across disciplines. The main image on this slide was created by Jake. Jake is a learner in a youth reach setting in Dublin, which is a programme for students between 16 and 21 who may have struggled or weren't able to engage or participate fully in mainstream education. So it's probably a second or even third chance education. I approached Jake's teacher because I knew they loved using a bit of Photoshop, and went through with them what we had been discussing as a committee about this particular presentation about creatively researching, and told him that we had this idea of a shield being pierced by an arrow. And I also wanted to explain to him that across the city of Dublin, that as an organisation, we've been working across settings in ways that we never had before. But Jake came back to me and Jake said that he wanted to add in a certificate onto the arrow, because he said that what we've been doing as teachers and as educators was we did it because we wanted all of our students to succeed. And we had a goal, we'd something that we were working with together, and that was what helped us to be able to break that shield. And he felt that the support that he'd been given helped him to be able to break that shield too. So when we think about researching creatively across disciplines or settings, consider now who are the researchers. So educators or learners. So all educators have effectively engaged in their research studies in the past couple of months, even if they don't know it. They've employed every single possible method to work out how they're going to engage their learners, how they're going to reach them, how we can assess them, how we can then keep their social and emotional welfare to the fore too. Our learners have become researchers. So they've had to work out new ways to be able to engage online, to be able to continue their educational journey, to communicate, to keep up their social connections with people, to be able to self-regulate, to manage their days without the structure of a timetable. And they've had to find multiple ways to approach and complete assessments too, in ways that they never thought they would be able to do, in spite of all of those technological barriers or the socioeconomic barriers that they might have faced. And very often, this has had to be done in a really, really creative way. So the questions that I want to pose to you are, what does researching creatively mean to you? What are the barriers that you have faced in your context, in your setting, and that you've shattered across settings and across disciplines in the past while? And how have you, or how could you, research creatively to try to capture what you've witnessed over the past 4 months? That's it,
Carrie,
Hazel.
thank you so much, Carrie. That's so thought-provoking. Really pertinent questions. Colleagues, I'm now going to hand straight over to Paul Campbell, who is the Association Lead for IPDA Hong Kong.
Thank you very much, Hazel. Thank you, Carrie, as well. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak with everybody today and share some perspectives on this next strand, looking at challenging orthodoxies, taking risks, and reimagining some practitioner teaching and learning. This is actually linked very nicely, and what I'm presenting today is a nice synthesis of a lot of the discussion and action planning of the Hong Kong Association. We're obviously in a context right now that's been characterised by civil unrest and constitutional uncertainty for quite a long time now. Also having dealt with, obviously, the global health emergency since January and the school closures and the effects on wider context as well since then. So there's been a lot of thinking about that, and actually challenging orthodoxies and taking risks is something that features in conversations both across sectors within education, also across disciplines within Hong Kong as well, and the world, I'm sure, too. And actually to be able to start to have conversations about how we might challenge orthodoxies, take risks, or even reimagine how we practice in a post-pandemic era. First thing that we're abundantly clear on is about understanding the context initially. So what this diagram hopes to represent is actually how we might break down or analyse current practices or orthodoxies that may be in place in their own context and how we may go about actually challenging them. Now, when we're reflecting on our context in particular, this is hugely important if we're going to be able to actually identify problems or orthodoxies that need challenging in the first place. Also to be able to understand what's going to be influencing the solutions that we might develop. Also here, this sophisticated understanding and this deep understanding of context is going to be important if professionals across disciplines and sectors are going to be able to exercise any sort of agency to be able to reimagine practitioner teaching and learning, or even challenge orthodoxies within their organisational settings. So whether that's the needs and expectations of the communities they serve, whether it's the stories or the histories of those involved in the learning and teaching within those contexts, or even if it is the political context, the policy agenda may be influencing practice. All of these are going to have huge influences and require analysis. We're actually going to think about what this reimagined approach might look like. Now, some of the interweaving themes that we were able to derive from that were themes of, well, identity. How do practitioners and professionals actually perceive what constitutes their professional role? What collaboration actually enables them to understand that or action that? How is inclusion at the heart of the process of professional learning, but also student learning as well? And what are the barriers or the enablers to that? Also, how do the policy agendas reflect values and the commitments that we then identify, or do they act as a hindrance to that as well? And within all of this, when trying to analyse all those themes that are influencing the context we might be working in, is thinking about what actors do we need to consider or what actors do we need to work with. Of course, we've got the students, regardless of the stage or sector in education might be in. Also, we're thinking about the broader community, the expectations there and the influences there too. We've also got educators, we've got leaders, we've got other invested communities, whether that's parents, or frequently what we see now is when we are trying to reimagine practice within both, whether it's primary, secondary, teacher education, higher education, frequently tackle some of the biggest challenges we face in society, education and educators are charged with that. So we have to think about, with these invested communities, could we reimagine the role that we have in helping communities understand the scope of what education can offer and what maybe a more joined up approach might look like, spanning different sectors, disciplines and professionals. Some of the questions that arisen from this for us have been, how is this complexity actually characterised in the context that we're talking about? What does this demand of how we practice, and what does this demand of how we could practice as well? And actually, is it just about practice and learning? I'll give you a hint. I think the answer is no. I think there's actually broader concerns here. We think more broadly about both systemic structures and influences, as well as the role of power within all of these dynamics and processes as well. And one last thing that I'll leave with is the concept of the practitioner. Is this something we need to look at? Frequently, conversations around practitioner talk about individuals whose practice can be easily described. Does that characterise the role of professional educators across disciplines? Actually, is it about the complex interplay between the knowledge, the experiences, the networks, capitals that individuals have access to, and the complex interplay of those, and being able to develop ways of practicing, ways of teaching, ways of learning that respond to the complex individual needs? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. And again, so much to think about there. So, colleagues, it's now my pleasure to welcome IPDA Scotland, first of all, and then we'll be handing over to IPDA Cymru. But first of all, over to IPDA Scotland.
Hello everyone, I'm Linda Bell and I'm co-presenting today with Susie Dick. I'm in Glasgow and Susie will be coming to you from the beautiful Isle of Arran. So our IPDA Scotland strand was thinking otherwise about methods and methodologies in close to practice research. And as you can see, we've broken things down into three headings. As a committee, when we discussed all of this, we were really thinking about how to increase submissions to conference in this strand and how to make this area methodologies more accessible to people who might be thinking about submissions. So we started by thinking about, is your methodology fit not just for purpose, but for your purpose? So beginning at the very beginning, think about what is your purpose? As a committee, we talked about this and we agreed that your overarching purpose might be very specifically enhanced professional learning. So perhaps your methodology is going to be something you haven't tried before, or it may be an approach that you have tried before and would like to become more confident in using. Whatever your purpose, you really have to make sure that you ask, what will work for me? What interests me and what can I realistically manage in my context? Those of us who are close to practice researchers have to juggle, as we know, all sorts of other demands, and we need to be realistic about what is doable in our context. This doesn't mean, of course, that we have to forgo innovative approaches or that we should lack ambition. As Plummer and Young put it, innovation may arise from pragmatic adaptations, rendering methodologies beneficial in contemporary research contexts. But we shouldn't feel at the same time that we must be innovative or different just for the sake of it. There's a wealth of methodologies open to us. Some of the most popular approaches currently include practitioner inquiry, action research, and lesson study, and there are lots of others gaining ground. Carrie mentioned some of them earlier on in the IPDA Ireland presentation, such as visual and creative methods. Whatever your chosen methodology, thinking otherwise about it could very reasonably be construed as thinking all around it, deeply and holistically. And Susie's going to speak a bit about that now.
So as Linda said, we're focusing on supporting methodology for those operating close to practice and enabling this area at the conference to be accessible. So I'm going to use an analogy of close to practice, if you bear with me. Can you all imagine yourself to be on a tennis court? Each time that ball comes at you, you need to be there and your racket ready. Every ball that comes to you over the net is a question challenging your methodology, and you need to be clear and focused to bat it back quickly and assuredly. Not every hit of that ball is perfect, ever, but you need to give it a good shot and you are ready for it, so it lands back on your opponent's, that critical challenger's side. So be analytical, be critical about your choice. Why this methodology? Being brutally honest with yourself can you explain to yourself clearly and succinctly what methodology you're using and why that one? Why not another? Is it really best suited to what you're researching? And do you know absolutely why? Is the approach best suited to your intended outcome? For example, a grounded theory to create a theory? Is it that that approach taken will capture the best data you believe is available? An approach that best uses your own skills, i.e. ethnographical. Do you know why you haven't chosen another methodology? Ultimately, your methodology is capable of meeting the objectives of your study, and it is a technique good enough to provide the information required to meet the overall goals of the study. You need to know that, and just like in tennis, practice helps. Linda.
Okay, and our third sub-strand here was understanding and explaining terms. So in this strand, we are talking about close to practice research. We've also mentioned methodological approaches such as practitioner inquiry and action research. But what do these terms mean to you and in a wider sense? So practitioner inquiry, for example, is described by Baumfield, Hall and Wall as the middle ground between action research and reflection, in which the research question arises from practice. Close to practice research itself, according to the BERA report from 2018, focuses on issues defined by practitioners as relevant to their practice and involves collaboration between people whose main expertise is research, practice, or both. But for both of these examples, you could easily find interpretations that are different, albeit subtly. In addition, what sorts of nuances or adaptations might you introduce in the course of your research and why? Look closely at definitions and your reasons for deciding on certain methodological subtypes. Some examples of this might be, why have you chosen participatory action research? What appeals to you about classical grounded theory as opposed to another type of grounded theory? You will have made these choices for compelling reasons rooted in your own theoretical perspective and your epistemological and ontological positions. So be as clear as you can about them. And Susie's just going to give us a final summing up.
So here's a methodology that resonates with and will work for you in your context. Make sure that it aligns with your research question and familiarize yourself with it thoroughly and be able to justify your choice.
Linda and Susie, thank you so much. That's so interesting. And we're now going to hand straight over to IPDA Cymru and Nia and Sophie.
Thanks so much, Hazel. I'm Emma Jane Milton.
Emma Jane, sorry.
No problem. I'm Emma Jane, Chair of IPDA Cymru, and I'm just going to welcome, and I'm very pleased that Nia and Sophie are leading today's session, as they are real experts in this area in terms of their work that they've done with the Arts Council of Wales on the Creative Schools Lead programme. So I'm going to hand over. Thanks so much, Nia and Sophie.
Thanks, Emma Jane. Well, before COVID-19 struck, momentum was building here in Wales towards the introduction of the new curriculum in 2022. This is a major overhaul which requires radical thinking throughout the system. However, the questions we've been grappling with in Wales are now suddenly universally relevant and urgent for everybody due to the impact of the pandemic on teaching and learning norms. Questions such as how can we organise our curriculum in response to local needs? What knowledge and skills do we need to plan and facilitate new ways of working? And what dispositions or capabilities do we need to work within a rapidly evolving and complex situation? It's clear the implications of professional learning are wide-ranging, but perhaps they need to begin with a profound change in mindset. Sophie and I have been working with teachers across Wales for the past 5 years to support them in making a paradigm shift in the way they approach the curriculum through nurturing their creativity. However, before we share some of our observations with you, perhaps it's best to start exploring this through thinking about different meanings of creativity, because it's so often misunderstood. When we begin working with teachers, many of them are incredibly nervous and wary of being asked to do something creative, because their misconception is that creativity is synonymous with artistic practice. There's also a tendency to think of creativity as generating wholly original ideas that produce works of great ingenuity, which renders it unattainable for most of us, and therefore, unsurprisingly, it's slightly daunting for people. In contrast, creativity, particularly when we're considering it in the context of professional learning, is much more about the day-to-day thinking about practice and knowing how to connect the what with the how. It's the interlacing of the vision, the big picture, the development of curriculum and learning experiences, and the ability to turn to the most appropriate pedagogical approaches to engage learners. There's a variety of definitions of creativity and frameworks available, but the one we've been using is by Lucas, Claxton and Spencer from the Centre of Real World Learning at Winchester University. It's called The Creative Habits of Mind, and it's easily accessible on the web if you'd like to look into it a bit more. Using a framework or agreed definition of creativity is often the first small step in developing ourselves as creative professionals. But as with any learning opportunity, it's not a linear process. Nurturing creativity is messy and it's disruptive, but there's probably not been a better time to do it than now.
Over the last 5 years, we've had the opportunity to talk to teachers in the classroom environment. This has been hugely valuable in terms of gathering emerging themes which show an evolving picture of what creative professional practice can look like. One of the most striking features is the honest acceptance that they don't have all the answers, but do have a willingness to ask questions, to take an inquiry approach, to venture and to explore ideas about teaching and learning within their own classrooms, and also to engage in honest, ongoing reflection in relation to the impact of their changed practice. These teachers have a renewed sense of the journey of the learning within their own classrooms, but rather than a narrow pursuit of predetermined outcomes, it is also about the skills, aptitudes, attitudes, and sense of engagement developed along the way, an appreciation of a more fluid approach which can allow them and their pupils to go beyond their learning goals. The methodology for professional learning we're referring to here comes from the Creative Learning Scheme, the Lead Creative School Scheme here in Wales. It is one model of many. However, we have found it to be an interesting and in this case highly effective one. It involves a blended learning approach in the sense that there is an element of initial training and then an extended period of in situ ongoing professional development within the classroom. The initial training provides insight into research surrounding creative learning and its national and global importance, but also, crucially, raises questions about the nature of learning. The training is not designed to give answers or a "this is how" model. It is designed to provoke thought and a desire to explore and connect. The programme involves the deployment of creative professionals to work in schools alongside teachers to focus on a particular development priority. The teacher and creative practitioner co-construct the teaching and learning within the classroom environment. The partnership lasts for approximately 10 weeks or so, and throughout there is an ongoing professional dialogue, a continuous reflection, and the opportunity to observe pupils learn and engage. In the current climate, the practice of deliberately seeing a familiar environment with a different perspective, accompanied by a challenging and supportive dialogue, can thus be explored.
Thank you so much. Wonderful, both to Nia and to Sophie. Well, colleagues, goodness me, how to round up such a fantastic morning. What an amazing series of conversations we've had and presentations. Incredible ideas, lots of concepts to grapple with. We've heard from people in Ireland, in India, in Hong Kong, on the Isle of Arran, from Glasgow, Wales, England, Switzerland, and lots of other places as well. You may have been following us on Twitter today, which has been wonderful to see as well. Well, colleagues, we really look forward to continuing these discussions and picking them up at the conference and beyond. So do please sign up for the conference. Do think about submitting an abstract. We're a very inclusive and welcoming and friendly conference group, and we really look forward to engaging with you. tell your friends and your colleagues about IPDA and the IPDA community as well. We're very welcoming. You can see on the slide in front of you that the IPDA journals are shown. So we have 2 IPDA journals. One is Professional Development in Education. That's our long-standing journal, and our newer journal, Practice, Contemporary Issues in Practitioner Education. You can read about both of those journals on the website. You can contact us, have a conversation about an idea or a paper that you're thinking about developing. We would welcome you to do that. So, colleagues, until next time, it just remains for me to thank all our presenters and to thank you all for attending today. Thank you so much.